Welcome back, my seedlings, to our story about a man who helped breed some of the most controversial games in existence, but would eventually fall to one of his own creations. Last we left off, Wolfenstein 3D put Nazis back in style. I even hear Vogue gave it best of the season. But the game controversy we have on our hands today is one that few can rival, in both scope and significance. From game-breaking experiments to mass murder experiments, what we're looking at today set in stone some of the most iconic aspects of video game controversy, for better or worse. So, let's once again indulge in the deranged minds of Mr. Romero and friends as we take a look at one of game controversy's most infamous eras, the era of Doom. It is true these prefaces are worthlessly dramatic build-ups to something I could just dive into immediately instead, but I honestly believe our topic today deserves nothing but that. When it comes to game controversy, Doom was one of the first poster childs for it, alongside other classic examples like Mortal Kombat, Night Trap, and Postal. I'm saying this now though, I think Doom surpasses those petty dramas by a landslide. Sure, some were involved in governmental hearings that would change the regulation of game content forever, and the other was just kinda messed up nonsense that some folks didn't like, but none of them were ever used as scapegoats for one of the most heinous acts in American history. Doesn't mean the controversy is of any worth other than that, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Bottom line, Doom's controversies are receiving a very thorough examination today. But first, let's bring on some more pointless build-up. After the surprise success of Wolfenstein 3D, John Romero & Co. quickly capitalized on that by continuing work on future episodes, though Mr. Carmack, this one, also began work on a new 3D engine, one much more powerful and versatile than the Wolfenstein 3D one. Unfortunately, development of Doom started off a bit rough, as they let go of Scott Miller and Apogee, as well as their cat. I'm sure it was a sad time for all involved. Mr. Carmack provided the initial vision, Demons from Hell, and the team agreed to set out for a game with that idea in mind, while having an aliens-inspired atmosphere combined with B-movie style horror. However, creative differences emerged between Tom Hall and the rest of the group, as he wanted the game to have a bigger narrative focus while everyone else, especially Romero, just wanted to kill demons. And eventually these differences culminated in his resignation. He'll come back though. Oh, don't worry, he'll come back. From there, development went much more smoothly, and the team even managed to stick in multiplayer modes mere weeks before the game's initial release, which, as with Wolfenstein 3D, was put out through shareware and published through the newly formed GT Interactive. And that release was very, very hyped. So hyped, in fact, that not even an hour and a half after the upload of the first episode, thousands upon thousands of gamers rushed to get their hands on a copy, which killed the servers where the devs put the game on. Even their business manager was shocked at this display. Needless to say, it had another hit on its hands. There we go. Why the hell do I keep doing that? Now, I apologize if this sounds very condescending, because it is, but I bet you're thinking, what exactly is Doom? Well, you play as the titular Doom guy, and you got yourself trapped in hell. So now you gotta fight your way out of there, and that's it. A lot simpler than Wolfenstein 3D, eh? And unlike that game, I put a lot of time in with Doom. And boy, it is sweet. It took most, if not all, of the elements of Wolfenstein 3D and cranked it up to 99. It still has that essential maze game design where you gotta find the exit, but the opponents are even more aggressive and trickier than any of those Nazi bastards in Wolfenstein 3D. Luckily, the gameplay is actually fucking awesome this time, because going around at 50 miles per hour plowing away at demons, skulls, and those godforsaken man-bear pigs is so much fun. So much fun. It sure held up a lot better than Wolfie Wolf, I can guarantee that. And it's a good way to blow up some steam, too. I could go on and on praising this game, but as per usual, we need to focus more on the people who weren't praising it. The mid-90s was a very fragile time for public perception towards video games, and that all came to a head during the 1993 Senate hearings. You remember those, right? The ones where that fake Democrat Joe Lieberman and a few others tried to convince the US that games like Night Trap and Mortal Kombat were sick and disgusting, and then told game makers they had a limited amount of time to make a rating system so the government wouldn't have to do it themselves? Romero and those crazy boys just so happened to release Doom the day after those hearings. The joke writes itself, doesn't it? Truth be told, I actually thought Doom was a part of those hearings, so learning this made me feel like a moron. But at least Congress looked like even bigger morons, where they did this whole show and dance about how bad them video games are, and then Doom defied all those standards not even 24 hours later. Ugh, God bless you, Doom. Oh wait, never mind, I forgot where you were for a second. And like with Wolfenstein 3D, Doom's reception was pretty positive upon release. Stories and tales were told throughout the internet of kids staying up late and adults skipping out work to play this masterpiece of catharsis. Even Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails got hooked on the game. However, and I apologize again if this sounds like I'm treating you like morons, because I am. But what do you get when you mix a game with demons from hell and a predominantly late baby boomer / early Gen X era parental presence? Plenty of watchdog groups and religious societies decrying the end product. It's pretty much the same shit we've seen on this show countless times though, and it had about as much as an effect as those have had. You remember that viral video of that guy chasing his dog when he ran straight for a bunch of deer and the guy was yelling, "Fenton! Fenton! Oh Jesus Christ! Fenton!" Yeah, that video? I remember a comment someone made on that thing where they apparently misheard the dude and thought it was just a crazy guy chasing after a bunch of deer while yelling, "Satan! Satan! Oh Jesus Christ! Satan!" Okay, follow me here. The religious people and watchdog folks are that guy, and the deer are Doom and its demons. Does that explain my thoughts well enough? No? Then I've done my job perfectly. Moving on. Fenton! Doom would still be a fascination amongst the world for quite some time, with Doom 2 becoming one of the first games to be rated by the ESRB, just 2 weeks after its inception. But its most notorious days in the spotlight wouldn't come until 6 years after its release. Much had happened with Romero and friends in that time span, of which I'll go into detail in the final part, but something temporarily brought them back in the worst way possible. On April 20th, 1999, 2 young high schoolers by the name of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold armed themselves heavily and went on a shooting rampage in their high school that lasted no less than 1 hour, taking the lives of 13 people and, in the process, their own lives as well, in what was, at the time, the worst school shooting in the United States, the Columbine Massacre. Bringing this up is not exactly something I'm excited about, which, depending on your view, may be a tad hypocritical. But since we're actually discussing tragedy this time, I don't see any reason to be joking around much. In the aftermath of the chaos, many possible explanations for the incident had formed, and one of the more controversial ones were violent video games, the most prominent of which was, of course, Doom. See, Mr. Eric Harris was one of the many people fascinated with the game, to the point where he even designed some of his own custom levels. Videotapes he made before the shooting further showcased that obsession, saying that the massacre will be just like Doom. He shared this obsession with his co-conspirator, and from all this, an apparent connection between the game and the incident was made, resulting in everyone flipping the flip out. This connection was so fierce that it even reached Congress again, where folks like Mr. Lieberman and John McCain, and even the feckin' president decried Doom and similar games and said that we ought to think twice about them. A bill was then introduced to fight against such games, something called the 21st Century Media Responsibility Act, which would force retailers to pay huge fines if they sold these games and presumably other forms of such media to minors. Romero and company weren't taking the situation in stride, but that was for mostly unrelated reasons. John Carmack was still at the company, working on Quake 3 Arena with the new staff. The environment surrounding them wasn't very helpful for development though, as they were getting hounded and harassed by all kinds of folks inside and outside their office building, via hate letters, inflammatory phone calls, news reporters wanting to get quotes, even protesters. The team had to hire security guards to maintain some of that stuff, but even they couldn't help stop the inevitable lawsuits, including one that was filed 8 days before the Columbine Massacre. Mr. Romero was faring just as poorly, perhaps even more so, but again mostly for unrelated reasons. Regardless, it was pretty clear at that point that the push against Doom and likewise was at its peak. Also, while games being blamed for horrible tragedies is not anything new, I don't think a game had yet been blamed for something of this magnitude. Not even during the Senate hearings did we see this much pressure and volatility from all sides. It seemed like something was gonna blow over at any moment. However, it doesn't take a group of philosophers to realize that despite how large the controversy grew, the flaws of it were no less prevalent. Despite their troubles, Mr. Romero and Mr. Carmack weren't about to take shots lying down, the latter of which was quick to point out ye old logical fallacy, correlation does not equal causation. Just because the Columbine perpetrators played Doom obsessively doesn't mean that Doom is solely responsible for the pair's atrocious acts. Sure, it's easy to argue it didn't help them much at all, but the two kids were already perpetually disturbed. They'd been viciously bullied for a period of years, their mental health was in the pits, they even had a few prior offenses, though they were much more mild compared to their final offenses. Mr. Romero's thoughts were from a slightly different perspective, one from both a former mentally distressed child himself and a parent of 3 children. He even admitted he took his anger out on making these violent games, the anger he accumulated from his rather dark childhood. Quoting him, "While violence on games can have an effect, the responsibility befalls upon the parent." And that's it right there. It's not the government or the game publishers who decide whether or not kids can play this, it's their guardians, the ones who care for them. I'm not about to make any claims, but given the status of those two at the time, I don't think their parents were of much help either. So, with all of this in mind, while I acknowledge the importance of Doom's presence during this time, I absolutely despise this controversy. A lot. Forget all the research that's already been published about how violent video games actually affect people, and all the arguments Congress made to push their case. This controversy is flawed upon concept, mainly because I don't find Doom to be probable enough in order to fulfill the role it got. Yes, for the millionth time, it's incredibly violent, but believe it or not, there's more to the game. For instance, in the game's backstory, the Doom guy was told by his commanding officer to fire upon civilians, to which he replied by beating the shit out of him. Sure, for the rest of the game, you're still mostly saving yourself, but the fact that the dude outright refused to shoot upon innocent civilians says quite a lot. I think the best argument one could make as to how exactly this game could have affected the Columbine pair is that, like with other folks, they used Doom as catharsis, perhaps imagining the demons as their school bullies. But there would still be issues with that argument even if that were the case. A, by that logic, you could then replace Doom with practically any other game with a similar basis and it would probably have a similar effect. B, it's been proven that they didn't use the game as practice for the shooting and were merely just addicted to it. And C, there are still those other folk who just played the game not only because it was cathartic, but because it was fun. Hell, people probably weren't even thinking about catharsis at all while playing it. Again, these kids were fucked up in the head, and there are too many factors that contributed to their disturbing motivations more effectively than Doom ever could. Ultimately, it seems to me that this is just another case of the game being there at the wrong place and the wrong time. They could have used any other game, hell, even some of their other arguments like music and goth culture? Seriously? This isn't all to say that there weren't people who were for Romero and crew. Plenty of other folks joined in the fight against Congress. But the fact that they wanted to start regulating violent games just because they believed that Doom had played a large part in one of the worst mass shooting incidents in American history, not even considering alternatives, is absolutely ridiculous. Luckily for us folks, the bill wasn't quite as impactful as it initially sounded, and any further attempts to make regulation even more strict were struck down in legal battles. And surprisingly, nothing else seemed to come out of this waste of tax money hootenanny. I'm aware of some media products that cut down some of its content because of Columbine, but video games pretty much stayed the same. So yeah, I guess that's a good resolution as any other, even if it's a bit anticlimactic. Anyway, that's pretty much what the original Doom has to offer. It's surely an interesting controversy for its historical aspects and large scope, but I still hate that it happened in the first place. I guess that's to be expected of past controversies, but still. Really, guys? As for other games in this series attracting controversy, the reboot caught some flack for being too violent when it was shown off back in E3 2015, but you can easily guess what I think of that. And I guarantee Doom's controversial legacy shall live on for many generations to come, pissing people off only further for each Wait, why would game violence be controversial in this day and age? That doesn't make any sense. Unless... Dear God. What if the government has been regulating our games? No, not our games, but game controversy. Now Gamergate makes so much sense, because nothing that convoluted and flawed could come from nowhere else but our government. That would also explain why the internet is so anal about social justice stuff in games too. And that would explain why Konami were such pussies and dropped 6 Days of Fallujah into a ditch. Jesus Christ. 35 episodes and 3.5 years of this piece of shit YouTube show, and I never even noticed I've been living a lie the whole time. There's no other explanation. This is all they're doing.
The truth is out there, you sheeple. It's out in the open, and you're not noticing. You don't take this opportunity now, you'll never get another chance again. You fools are living a lie! A lie that feeds off of your hatred from all the stupid shit that's happened over these worthless and wasteful years. Wake up, you stupid bastards! Wake up! Consume the bleach of knowledge! Let the chlorine free your minds from this cruel reality! Drink the bleach, you fuckers! Drink it! Drink it! Drink it now! Drink it now! Ow, 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 ow!
Like that.